They promised revenge, and it arrived in a barrage of missiles. Iran's attack on the US military came in the middle of the night. From nearby streets, shocked Iraqis filmed the attack with their mobile phones. 2 military bases where US forces were stationed were the targets: the Erbil air base in Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq and the Al-Assad base to the west. 15 ballistic missiles were fired, 4 of them failed in flight. Just over a year ago, Donald Trump surprised his troops at the Al-Assad base with a Christmas visit. But today, before the missile strike, the US president was defending the killing of Iranian General Qassem Soleimani.
He was a monster, and he's no longer a monster, he's dead.
And he warned Iran again.
If Iran does anything that they shouldn't be doing, they're going to be suffering the consequences, and very strongly.
Iran says it doesn't want war.
The United States killed a number of people in a foreign territory. That's an act of war.
Iran says its attacks are over. The limited strikes against military targets might satisfy the demand for revenge within Iran. And the fact that nobody died gives the US an excuse not to retaliate. But what happens next is up to an unpredictable US president. And his only response so far is a tweet: "All is well, so far so good." And he'll make a statement in the morning. And in an extraordinary development, a passenger plane carrying 180 people crashed in Iran just hours after the missile strike. The Ukrainian Airlines Boeing 737 caught fire shortly after takeoff from Tehran airport. Iran is blaming a mechanical problem. There were no survivors. Earlier, dozens of mourners were crushed in a stampede at the burial of Qassem Soleimani. Hundreds of thousands surged around the truck carrying his remains, desperate to have clothes and scarves touched against the coffin.
Middle East correspondent Adam Harvey joins us from Beirut. And Adam, what's the latest on the situation?
Well, Juanita, we've got an investigation into this crash of a Ukrainian Airlines jet just outside Tehran airport. Very early on, the Ukrainian embassy has said that this was due to a mechanical failure, but the timing of the crash is extraordinary, just 2.5 hours after those missiles were launched from Iran at US bases in Iraq. You'll have Iranians this morning wondering whether they are at war with the United States, and I have to say, it's very, very close. It'll all depend on what happens next. We'll hear from the US president in a couple of hours. The Iranians themselves have said that they don't want war, but what the Iranians say and what they do are very different things. They have used proxy forces in the past to attack in places like Lebanon. It's very possible that that could happen again.
The federal government has confirmed that all Australian defence and diplomatic personnel stationed in Iraq are safe and have been accounted for. The National Security Committee will meet tomorrow to discuss this latest escalation, but it's unlikely to recommend a troop withdrawal. Here's political reporter Jane Norman.
News of the dramatic escalation broke while the Prime Minister was in the air on his way to fire-ravaged Kangaroo Island. Within minutes, he was on the phone to the Chief of Defence.
All Australian diplomatic personnel and all ADF personnel are safe, but it is obviously a very fluid situation.
Since tensions began rising late last week, the government's been drawing down staff at the embassy. Roughly 300 defence and diplomatic personnel remain concentrated in the capital and at Camp Taji, where they've been helping train local forces in the fight against Islamic State.
The CDFI gave authority this morning to do what was necessary and to take what actions and decisions were necessary to protect ADF personnel and diplomatic staff.
Scott Morrison and his senior ministers have also been in contact with their US counterparts, trying to get a sense of what happened and what could come next.
This is potentially very dangerous indeed, and I don't want to see Australia drawn into a military conflict in the Middle East.
I'm not going to make any predictions here, but it is concerning.
There are also concerns for the safety of an Australian Navy ship, which will soon be heading to the region as part of a military mission to protect oil tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. Cabinet's National Security Committee will meet here in Canberra tomorrow. At this stage, it's unlikely the government will take unilateral action and extract the hundreds of defence and diplomatic personnel stationed in Iraq, given Australia's part of a US-led coalition. But longer term, analysts say the question for the government is whether Australian troops should still be there.
When really the original purpose for their going, which was to deal with ISIS, is now in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're out this year, but not as a result of today's events.
A lot could happen in between. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
The Prime Minister's been very careful in his response to the escalating hostility between the US and Iran. He's neither unequivocally backed Donald Trump's decision to order the killing of General Soleimani, nor has he condemned Iran's response. There are three reasons for this temperate language. Unlike the US, Australia has an embassy in Iran, and no one wants to put those Australian diplomats at any heightened risk. Second, a British-Australian academic remains in prison in Iran on an espionage charge, and delicate negotiations continue to secure her release. Finally, Australia wants to avoid any escalation of tensions in the Middle East. The National Security Committee of Cabinet will meet tomorrow morning, and senior ministers are determined not to overreact here. There's unlikely to be any withdrawal of Australian troops from Iraq in response to this. And what's more, the deployment of an Australian Navy frigate to the Strait of Hormuz will still go ahead this week. This deployment was announced 5 months ago to protect commercial shipping in the Strait. Importantly, Labor supports both this deployment and the continued presence of troops in Iraq, while over Baghdad wants them there. So for now, it's situation normal, amid an expectation, and certainly a hope, that things won't escalate any further. But, as is often the case, no one can be entirely certain what Donald Trump might do, particularly as he's now in an election year.